Hello. It's a rainy, gloomy day here in the outskirts of Toronto, Ontario, and I'm feeling sleepy. And I felt called to finally make this video that I had been thinking of, and it is about life philosophy and specifically using life philosophy in your creative work. So I really want to talk about this in the context of bringing meaning into the creative process, but not only bringing meaning, but understanding how the meanings that you develop yourself apply to your creative work. If we're hoping to bring meaning into the creative process, I think it relies kind of on what that meaning looks like, what life philosophy looks like, how philosophy and our understanding of things, our worldviews kind of translate into our work. I think it's really, really hard for an artist to not do that. So, they exist, I'm sure. But for me, you find my life philosophy and everything that I do, it is all-encompassing. And I believe that we use creativity with whatever format that might be to speak in ways that perhaps words or language, our verbal communication just can't necessarily say. And we can do that in things with poetry or music or all these things. They're symbolic expressions of something. When we create, we have visual symbolism, and sometimes it's playing with the world, and sometimes it's a part of it. I always think about that very famous if I can't remember what it is, but it's the whole idea where the guy put a urinal in an art museum and said this is art, and it started this whole question about what is art, and that's play, and in some ways that's a philosophy of its own. So the whole point is not everything is going to be substantially meaningful in your way or my way, but meaningful nonetheless, in that it's engaging with the world around you in a way that is inherently meaningful, and that meaning is assigned contextually and by the subject involved. That just came out of my ass. So if that doesn't make sense, the whole point is that when I was starting to think about this kind of concept of using life philosophy in art, it really was hard for me to sift out. I couldn't figure out exactly where life philosophy and art overlapped and where they separated. And I think what I had to figure out is what my core philosophy is. And I'm a very existential person. I like to address the very nature of life. I like to address the very nature of the human condition and what we deal with as conscious sentient beings, in this sort of universal experience that binds us. So of course subjectivity is the root of that, but also so is change, so is discomfort, so is this kind of conversation with the act of living, and kind of courting the act of death at the same time. If you look at all my work, whether it's written or visual, you'll see that it's all about grief, it's all about change, it's about impermanence, time, and kind of just the intimacies of life in this same way. It's also asking about meaning, and interpretation, and attributing value to our lives and our lived experiences. So that's kind of my core philosophy, is this kind of consistent understanding of both the cyclical nature of life, but also kind of our choreography with it and how we decide to navigate that. So that's always what it is. It's always an exploration of that. And I believe my core philosophy is that curiosity piece where we look at these very, very universal themes, like I said, grief and change and death and all of these things that we all face that we aren't able to avoid and we have no control over, and how we choose to interact with that. And of course there's things like control, there's things like resistance, which are kind of one and the same, and there's doubt and fear and anger and loss and these sort of very real lived things that we deal with on the daily that maybe speak to in an engaging or inquisitive way. And so that curiosity piece is really my philosophy, is anything that you experience, look at, or whatever can be explored in a deeper way, and it doesn't have to be analyzed, but it can be explored. You can ask yourself about it and ask yourself what it feels like, what it's looking like, how it's showing up in your life, etc., etc., etc. Anyways, you find this most thematically in my work, so the actual concepts that you'll see are quite existential, at least the inspiration is. So kind of like I said, most of my work is about the very nature of living, its change, its honesty, its cycles and loss, and of course, most importantly, play. You'll find play across most of my work in some way, in some capacity. How does life philosophy come into creation. And I already talked about like how it shows up thematically in the actual works that I do. So we have that kind of representation of these themes of death, dying, loss, play, the meaning of life, the experience of life, whether that be through doubt or heartbreak or joy, connection. It can be through rawness and vulnerability. It can be through playfulness and navigating kind of our exchange with time and all of that. So yeah, we have these like, you know, very real representations of these topics kind of in my work. We see this both visually and in my writing. But it's also foundational to my process of creation. And so I try to turn creative sessions into listening exercises. So I often talk about, mainly in like my writing, I talk about conversation and how we have these conversations with our lives. And we think of conversation, we think about me talking to my neighbor, we talking to my friends or my family or my loved ones, and any of these relationships that I have, but we can extend this sort of dynamic to the rest of our lives. We can engage with our mornings. How are we showing up to our mornings? How are the mornings speaking to us? How are we speaking to them? And it's in this way that we have this sort of like animism, but it's not only animism, it's granting that value and voice to your experience. And when you're engaging with creativity or painting or writing or cooking or music or whatever it is, and you turn this into a listening exercise, you can ask yourself, does this feel right? Do I like how this sounds? How is this showing about? What is it about? How is my feeling, my sense of this experience related to, like, where is the overlap? Am I coming into this 80% me? And you always are. You're always going to be coming into a situation more you than not, but you can explore, like, where is this coming from? And you might not know the answer, but you can ask yourself where it's coming from. Like, often I know things are coming from me. Do I know where from me they're coming? I'm not a mind reader of my own mind. And I'm also just like, you know, I'm limited by my own experience, and I can pretend to be objective all I want, and I know I'm not. Anyway, so you just keep going on rants, but yeah, so I attribute every kind of creative thought in my head, every momentary aha moment that I have is attributed to the act of being curious. And, you know, curiosity is great. You ask questions and the answers are always good to find, and if the answer isn't a concrete, solid period at the end, still that journey and the line of questioning is what's impactful and meaningful, especially since most of my work is existential, because it's so existential. There isn't often an answer. So my one piece, I'm looking at it right now, something greater. Something greater is short form for could something greater guide me? And that came from a place where I was like really feeling hopeless, and like I lost my religion when I was really young. I was a teenager, and I was like, oh my God, I don't believe in this like higher power anymore. And there was this kind of gap in my understanding of where refuge could be found. And obviously these are questions that can't be answered, and I used to try to answer them, and I'm not wasting my fucking time anymore. But I asked myself about that feeling of looking for something greater to, you know, release and surrender that control to. And, you know, that feeling, that process of kind of the unrequited hope for refuge is what I explored. I got no answer about what that means or where that comes from, or if there's an answer, or like in the sense that is there something there to guide me. But the feeling was explored, and it came about with the piece. There's that. If I find, for example, that I'm being hard on myself and telling myself, okay, you're shit at what you do, you can also just like be an active observer. So this is showing up not only in the creation process, but also in the takeaway. Because, you know, working on a piece, there's always the ugly stage. It's inevitable. It's the entire thing until it's done. Where you're just not happy with it. It doesn't look the way that you want it to. And I could be saying like, I'm shit at this is ugly, I've been lying to myself about how much I enjoy this, I'm in rooms that I'm not supposed to be in, I'm not talented, I'm not bringing anything new to the table. These are all, you know, stories we tell ourselves, narratives that we bring. And, you know, through this kind of life philosophy of being curious, I can act as an observer, and know that first and foremost, like, you know, this is all a part of the process. So that validates my experience that like, oh, it is happening, I'm confirming it's happening. And then also I know with that shitty moment and that confirmation that it will also pass, because I can contextualize that within the wider philosophy of change and impermanence and that fun stuff that's also equally and existentially on a visceral level terrifying. So yeah, if you act out your philosophy while exploring your life, you're bound to come to a few conclusions, and they might not be, again, that hard stop, that period, but you will end up with your feet on the ground at some point, and which then in their own ways that conclusion becomes another lesson. So you have a painting which teaches you like the something greaters, that, you know, teaches you something in that journalistic way where I've had the catharsis, I've learned through the process of creation, the thoughts, the feelings, and the experiences that are associated with exploring those thoughts, feelings, and experiences in that kind of meta way. And so it often begins to reflect your mind state at the time, even if you didn't know in the planning that that's where it was coming from. I knew that I had this kind of unbased feeling. My feet were not on the ground. I knew that I was feeling hopeless. I knew that I was feeling like I needed that safety net. And I knew that I was wishing for some like solace in some way. And it started off just with this dog. I was like, oh, this dog's a cool vibe. I like the way it feels. And it felt that kind of nostalgic connection with something greater than I am. And I didn't realize that that's what I was looking for in those moments, was that answer. And I didn't know that those were the questions that were being asked until I stayed open during the process of creation. It begins to reflect my mind state. The idea eventually means more to me symbolically after the fact because of what I've learned in the process than the symbolism that I introduced as the concept, because it just like didn't have that kind of influence of time and reflection in it. So it compounds. And then creativity, like in that way, can be a mirror to you and what's going on and to your own philosophy. You can understand, like, if we know that the nature of life is change and impermanence and curiosity and play, and these very, very meaningful and valid experiences make life interesting, and both interesting and also hard, then we know that this is also how it's going to play out, right? Like, we know that this is the very nature of things. We stop asking ourselves why or how come, and we say, like, instead, this is the feeling and this is how it showed up. I wish when I was thinking about this video, I was trying to think of a way for this to apply to you because I'm limited by my own mind and my own experience, and I don't really know how to tell you to engage with your life philosophy in a meaningful way, only that it can be done. It'll be much different than mine. I expect it to be much different than mine, but whatever it is, lean into it, explore it. Your worldview is often this experience that you can lean on very solidly a lot of the time. And I would challenge you to include change in your philosophy, because it will also leave space in your worldview for it to move. I find it really difficult when we have this kind of like static interpretation of the world to not lose faith really quickly, to not lose the base and the foundation, because if it changes the foundation, then it's quite rubber and quite like elastic. You have that room for dynamism and the reality that things are going to be different based off of the experiences and things that you collect in your life. Using the way that we understand the world to navigate our experiences will both contribute to a meaningful creative process, but also authentic and meaningful work for you, relatable work for others, raw and honest, and really based off of this genuine experience, which is really all we're trying to do, is connect with people through whatever medium it is that we're using. And that connection is always made through that ability to have a conversation. And that can be a conversation with your life, a conversation with the themes and experiences that you're going through, the symbols that can represent that, and also showing that process is inherently almost identical to that cycle that you're trying to understand. So, we know creation is a microcosm of this wider experience, so just using that to make a meaningful and enjoyable time for you, for others, and for a better world as a whole. And I don't really know what I'm saying anymore. This is the problem with being so quick on my feet. I should have done improv. I should move from art to improv. Yes, and. I have nothing more to say. Goodbye.